Woo! Ladies and gentlemen, today we're going to be ranking every single European national team based on how they performed in 2023. Now, for those of you that have been watching the channel for some time, you know that I have done this the past 2 years. So of course I got to keep the tradition, but just please note that this video is purely based on how each national team performed in 2023, which is also correlated to what their expectations initially were. I'm not ranking this based off of who has the best squad on paper. I'm basing this mostly on performances and expectations. And yeah, also to save me a little bit of headache, I added an extra tier for this video. Putting a national team at S tier essentially means they had close to a flawless year. A still means it was an incredible year, but potentially more improvement needed. But yeah, if you haven't already, please drop a like, subscribe if you're new. Let's try to hit 4,000 likes on this video. Okay, now with all that out of the way, let's get into it, starting off with Andorra. Right off the bat, they got to be at the bottom tier. They did not pick up a single win in their qualified campaign. Just 2 draws against Kosovo and Belarus. Not good enough. Next up, Albania. These guys had a tremendous Euro qualified campaign, topping a group, sharing points with Czech Republic. After many people were expecting Czech Republic and Poland to advance, they outclassed both of them, with many golazos as well throughout the entire campaign, with players that play in other leagues outside of Europe. Doing it without their star man Broja as well, as he was injured, is very impressive. We all know how passionate this country can be, but with Silvino's tactics as well, he really made them an incredible force on the pitch. This year has shown us that they can be a genuine threat and potentially surprise many at Euro 2024, despite them being in the group of death. Their most impressive win was against Czech Republic, beating them 3-0 in Tirana. As impressive as Albania have been, only picking up 1 loss against Poland, they did drop some other points that they just shouldn't have, such as the final international break where they picked up 2 draws against the quote-unquote underdogs in this group, Moldova and the Faroe Islands. Sure, maybe motivation was not at an all-time high since they basically already secured qualification, but for me, that's got to stop them from being all the way at S. I'll put them at A, which is still very good. Not to mention, this is no discredit to Albania, by the way. I was really impressed with the football they played. However, Poland and Czech Republic truly have been underwhelming this year, especially Poland, which we will get into later. That being said, also by the end, Czech Republic did manage to share the same amount of points with them. Regardless though, A is still amazing, and I truly wish this national team the best of luck. Moving on to Armenia, they definitely had many moments this year where they left fans hopeful. Their biggest highlight by far was grabbing an away win against Wales, scoring 4 goals against them as well, as it's always difficult for anyone to go to Cardiff. Along with getting a draw against Turkey and close scorelines against Croatia, both times finishing 1-0, this side definitely showed a lot of fight on the pitch with more proper tactics under their new coach Petrokov. A lot of their scorelines were close, but that being said, somehow their worst ever loss this year was against Latvia, losing 2-0. The country that finished last place in this group, not getting any other points throughout the entire campaign. Definitely a sad ending for Armenia this year, but still a memorable year. They never made it easy for their opponents, but still it was unsuccessful at the end. I'm not putting them all the way at the bottom, but I'll put them at D. Moving on to Austria next, they're looking far more improved compared to previous years. 2023 in particular was a marvelous step in the right direction, finishing their Euro qualified group in 2nd place, 1 point behind Belgium. Their only loss, to no surprise, was against Belgium. The first time they played them, it finished in a 1-1 draw, and the second time around, after being 3-0 down, Austria fought hard to nearly equalize but falling short, finishing 3-2. At the beginning when this group was drawn, many expected Belgium to easily top the group, and for Austria and Sweden to go neck and neck with one another. But Austria really competing for the top with Belgium instead, as Austria got 2 very solid wins against a Scandinavian country, absolutely shattering their dreams to qualify for Euro 2024 very early in the campaign. According to the Euro 2024 decided pots for the draw as well, this side was the only 2nd place team to finish in pot 2, meaning they are declared to be the best 2nd place team in the competition. Without a doubt, an A or an S for Austria. Albania finished higher in their own table, sure, but Austria had a better record at the end with 6 wins, 1 draw, and 1 loss. Not to mention, they were also one of the many teams to defeat Germany this year in a friendly. I'm torn, but I'm gonna put them at A with Albania. Now taking a look at another team in the same group as Austria, Azerbaijan. They overall look to be having a Euro qualified campaign to forget, however, they did grab 2 wins. One against Estonia away, and the other against Sweden 3-0 on the final international break, despite picking up a red card 13 minutes into the second half. That being said, prior to that match, Sweden did demolish them 5-0, and Belgium also demolished them 5-0 5-0 on the final match day. Austria also had a 4-1 hammering against them, meaning all of the stronger nations in this group did expose their defense at one point. I'm sorry, Azerbaijan, a few cool moments, but I think that defensive record has to put you at the bottom. Another team that for sure needs to be at the bottom is Bosnia. I wouldn't necessarily say that they were a team that looked to have guaranteed qualification, but after their impressive Nations League campaign last year, they looked to at least have a solid shot. Instead, they finished 5th place in their group with 3 wins and 7 losses. One of those wins was against Iceland on the first match day, and it all just went downhill from there, as the other 2 were only against Liechtenstein, not even with the most convincing display either time they faced each other. Few injuries for sure halted their success, but also the mess in the management. It's a shame. Hopefully they redeem themselves in the playoffs, but this has to be one of the biggest fall-offs when you look at how Bosnia were last decade. Moving on to Belgium, big contrast from that Bosnia talk. They were phenomenal, and I'll be putting them all the way at the top at S. I gave this side a lot of criticism in the past, I know. With their golden generation fading away, they did not look to be the most convincing at all in the World Cup. With some of those players now gone, and many injured as well, they had to utilize some new talent that definitely flourished. Even the ones that did stay really redeemed themselves. Lukaku may have cost them a knockout spot in the World Cup, but he finished this qualifier campaign as the top goal scorer with 14 to his name. At the beginning, he scored a hat-trick against Sweden, and on the final match day, he scored 4 goals against Azerbaijan. So this was not the best Belgian squad on paper, and they still performed near to perfection. Top of the group with just 2 draws, one of the matches unfortunately being left at that due to a shooting. Going back to the very bottom though, we gotta put Bulgaria there. 4 draws, 4 losses, no wins in their Euro qualifier group. Very, very disappointing, as they should have at least pushed for 3rd. 4th minimum. Moving on to Belarus, they finished 4th place, 1 point in front of Kosovo, 3 points behind Israel, grabbing 3 wins, which was more than I was expecting, to be fair. They also put off some interesting fights, including nearly beating Switzerland. Yup, they were up 3-1 at one point, but the Swiss did eventually come back. I don't know, they did better than I expected, but it's still not very much at the same time. It's either a D- or an F+. I'll be nice to them and put them at D. A national team that's definitely going at F though is Cyprus. They failed to get a single win or even a draw in the entire Euro qualifier campaign, 8 for 8 losses. Their biggest loss being to Spain 6-0, but also losing to Georgia and Norway 4-0 and Scotland 3-0. Moving on to Croatia next. I gotta say, I'm not surprised how things turned out, but I'm still slightly disappointed. Sure, they did qualify at the end, but no disrespect to the other teams in their group. Their draw for the qualified campaign was a blessing. With Croatia's recent expectations finishing 3rd in the last World Cup, this should have been an easy 1st place finish. Maybe just falling short to Turkey, but not both times they faced Wales. Falling short to them twice did cause some panic on the 2nd to last match day, as if Wales continued to get wins on the final international break, Croatia would have been in the playoffs. It's just a common theme though in every single qualified campaign. Croatia just love to save everything at the end. The Cardia Croatians. Look, it was a really strong start. Great performances early on, just started to dip once injuries picked up, and they obviously did the job at the end. Not to mention, we can't forget about the Nations League, defeating Netherlands at their own home ground, and then losing to Spain on penalties, which is what they're known to succeed in. Maybe I'm being harsh towards Croatia, but I just think the expectations were much higher than what they delivered, even though they had those injuries. I'm gonna give them a B+. For the Czech Republic, I'll be putting them at the B tier. They did share points with Albania at the end of the campaign, but they should have simply been better at moments. Their only loss was that 3-0 embarrassment to Albania, but they were never able to beat them either, as in the other match it finished in a draw. They also drew to Moldova and barely beat the Faroe Islands at home. Regardless, they did qualify for Euro 2024 at the end, but it all went down to that final match day, where they did grab a solid win against Moldova. Had they not though, they would have been ranked much lower. I think B is fair given their standards as a national team. Moving on to Denmark, they topped their group tying points with Slovenia. Sure, they did the job, but given their standards, I expected them to qualify for Euro 2024 way sooner. They were halted many times, including to Kazakhstan at the beginning, where they blew a 2-0 lead to them, and also drew to Slovenia the first time they played them. This group was really looking neck and neck for most of the qualified campaign, with Kazakhstan, Finland, Slovenia, and Denmark all fighting for that top 2. Denmark did it at the end, but there was one break where they were trailing. They also barely beat San Marino in one of their matches, and lost to Northern Ireland at the end. To be fair, they were not playing their main starters. With the squad they have, Denmark really looked to be a bright team, but they just really cannot afford anymore to crumble under pressure, like they did at the World Cup. They deserve the credit. I'm sorry it sounds like I'm roasting them, but It's also, in a way, a compliment, just because I rate this national team so highly, so they could have been looking more convincing at times. Similar reasons to how I was criticizing Croatia and Czech Republic, but you know what? Denmark did top their group at the end, which is why I'll be putting them at A. Now for England though, they have been incredible this campaign. Topping their group undefeated, beating Italy both times they faced them, demolishing North Macedonia 7-0. They started to slow down at the end, especially against Macedonia, only grabbing a draw there. But they already qualified for Euro 2024 at that point. They also got a draw to Ukraine early as well, but still undefeated, which is why I think they deserve an S. Now for Estonia, despite securing a playoff spot due to their Nations League performances, that was last year. This year, in 2023, they finished last place in their group, only grabbing one draw. They have to go at the bottom. I'm sorry. Now for Finland. After they qualified for the last Euro tournament, many people held their head high that they could do it this time as well. Although they kept the pressure on at many moments, like I mentioned with Denmark, they ended up falling short to third place, tying points with Kazakhstan. Something to take pride in though, I guess, is that they got the biggest win against San Marino out of any of the other countries. But for Finland, I still think this is a disappointing finish to the campaign. A good fight regardless at moments, so I will put them at C. Faroe Islands are at F because, like some of the other teams in that category, they did not grab a single win. France, though, known to be the second best national team according to the FIFA rankings, definitely deserved to be at the top. In the qualifier campaign, they did not get defeated once. Just one draw to Greece on the final match day when they already qualified for Euro 2024. Apart from losing a friendly match to an uninspiring Germany somehow, amongst all the other fixtures, this shouldn't drop them lower than an S. Georgia is an interesting one to me. After their incredible Nations League campaign, some may have expected them to stir up this difficult Euro qualifier group, which essentially they failed to do. Wins against Cyprus, but then just a draw against Scotland and Norway. So not a successful year for Georgia, but they did not necessarily fumble in every performance. Besides that massive defeat to Spain, obviously. They had a tough group, so I'll be a bit generous to them and put them at C. Greece failed to automatically qualify for Euro 2024, but they did not look to have the best chance in that group, did they? 20 years ago, this side defied all odds, but it was simply too tough for them this time around against France and Netherlands. That being said, they put off really good fights against France both times they faced them. One match only losing to an Mbappe penalty, and the other on the final match day finished as a draw. Their only shameful defeat was losing 3-0 to Netherlands, but they were missing Mavropanos in that fixture. Greece put an admirable fight, and based off of their expectations in this difficult group, I think they really did the best that they could. They proved that they were better than Ireland at the end, beating them both times. I'll be nice to them and put them at B. Moving on to what many might disagree with me on, but again, guys, we are basing this off of the year 2023, and Germany had an awful year. Already qualifying for Euro 2024, of course, since they were the host. All they did was play a series of friendlies this year, but failed to win way too many. The only wins they grabbed in 2023 were to Peru, France somehow, and the United States. Japan defeated them 4-1, and out-of-form Poland beat them 1-0. Too many terrible fixtures to go through. Yes, they were just friendlies, but that is all we have to base off of for the German national team this year. The players simply looked uninspired, lacked passion, looked to just simply avoid injury. Fair, they're friendlies, but it left their manager Hansi Flick sacked. And they're still not doing well with Nagelsmann. Now, they did grab some wins and draws along the way, so I won't put them all the way at the very bottom, but this is still a terrible year for Germany. I'm putting them at D. Yeah, it's very strange that I'm about to put Gibraltar just a rank lower than them. But Gibraltar were far worse, don't get me wrong. They actually were statistically the worst team in the Euro qualifiers this year, conceding more goals than any other national team. They also gave France their biggest ever victory in their entire history, getting demolished by them 14-0. Expectations were not very high for them, obviously, but this was absolutely a very dreadful year. They got to be at the bottom. Let's move on once again to a more positive note though, Hungary. You can argue that they deserve to be at S since they topped their group undefeated, even beating the toughest opponent on paper in their group, Serbia. Head to head both times they faced one another. But at the same time, I was expecting a little bit more from Hungary against the underdogs at moments when they faced them. They drew to each one of those countries once, so I was a bit surprised about that, and did play some of their matches without some key players. However, this group was not necessarily difficult for them. It was clear from the beginning that either Serbia or Hungary would top this group. Shout out to Hungary for doing it themselves, but not the most difficult group, and they still picked up a bit more draws than I expected them to. Which is why, although I put many undefeated teams in the S tier, I will not be including Hungary there as well. Next up, Ireland. They ultimately failed in that group with France, Netherlands, Greece, and Gibraltar. Wasn't necessarily expecting them to beat France or Netherlands, but they did put off some good fights against both of them. But they did lose to Greece both times they faced them. But their only wins were against Gibraltar this year, and a narrow victory against Latvia. I wouldn't put them all the way at the bottom, but they did have some decent fights throughout, so I will put them at D. Iceland, the national team to shock the world in 2016, is not living up to that name anymore. They finished 4th in this group, where against these oppositions, I'd say it was a decent chance for them to prove themselves. They could not, only 1 point in front of the dreadful Bosnia. The only thing you can really applaud this side for is getting a massive win against Liechtenstein 7-0. Their record against Bosnia really wasn't that much different, but Bosnia couldn't score that many goals against Liechtenstein. I'll be a little bit nice to Iceland and put them at D. They had some close fights throughout as well. Moving on to Israel. I know what some of you are thinking, but they are still part of UEFA. They failed to automatically qualify in what I thought would be the group of life, but to be fair, 3rd place, 2 points behind Switzerland, is not terrible. Their worst loss was 3-0 to Switzerland, but other than that, all close encounters. They loved scoring a stoppage time goal both times they faced Belarus to be the difference maker. Still though, they failed to beat Romania or Kosovo at all, a draw and a loss to both. Not the worst campaign, but Israel should have expected better here. I'm going for C. Moving on to Italy, they were not the most phenomenal in their group, but they obviously got the job done, qualifying for Euro 2024 at the end. They shared points with Ukraine on the final match day though, so they really cut it to the wire. A controversial final match against them as well, where many claim Mudryk should have been awarded a penalty. Expectations remain high for this national team though, of course. Despite not qualifying for the last 2 World Cups, they are the previous Euro champions. They lost their first ever match at home to England since 1961. Couldn't beat them the second time around either. I wouldn't remark this campaign as a massive thump of glory, but still, they did the job at the end, just showed some slight inconsistencies at moments. I will put them at B. Moving on to the glorious Kazakhstan. Well, it didn't finish so glorious actually. They got 4th place in their group and failed to automatically qualify. However, they deserve much more praise than the other teams that finished 4th place in the other groups. First of all, look at that point gap, sharing with 3rd place Finland and also 4 points away from both 1st and 2nd. It really went down to the final match day against Slovenia. If they got a result there, they would have finished 2nd. Now also, we have to keep in mind that prior to this qualifier campaign and the Nations League, Kazakhstan were known to be one of the worst football nations. Their last 2 World Cup qualifier campaigns, they finished last with no wins. But now they're pushing to play in Germany for Euro 2024, with still that playoff spot secured from their Nations League success. And throughout this Euro qualifier campaign, we've even seen them beat the favorites in this group, Denmark, after being 2-0 down. I think despite Kazakhstan finishing 4th, no one was expecting them to go toe-to-toe with these teams. I'm putting them at B. Latvia's only bit of damage in a group I thought they could stir up a bit more was a 2-0 win against Armenia. Not enough, sorry, they're going at F. Liechtenstein will also have to go at the bottom. I'm sorry, but there's just no debate. They lost to every single team, even though they scored that one banger against Bosnia. Now this one I might get some disagreements on, Lithuania. They finished just above Bulgaria because unlike them, they did grab 1 win. They were also able to draw against Montenegro and Hungary, but fell short to Serbia both times. This country is not really known to prioritize football. However, the second to last international break was memorable for them. With the win against Bulgaria and a draw to Hungary, it makes me want to be a bit more generous, but it really just was one small spurt of hope. So I'm going to put them at D. Moving on to Luxembourg, they failed to qualify for Euro 2024 automatically, but they did have a lot of great displays. Being able to shut down Bosnia twice, the second time they scored 4 goals against them. They were competing for 2nd place for a good amount of time, but fell short just a bit too much. Their worst displays by far were against Portugal with no surprise, but they also granted Portugal their biggest ever win in history, finishing 9-0, without Ronaldo by the way, and the other time they faced them it finished 6-0. If it weren't for those terrible scores against Portugal, I would actually be generous to this side and put them at B, but I think I have to knock them to C. Moving on to Moldova, they present a very similar situation to Kazakhstan. Yes, they finished 4th at the end, but they had an unforgettable campaign that went down to the final match day. They picked up a point to both Czech Republic and Albania, and 4 to Poland. Their win against them, they were 2-0 down, a bit similar to Kazakhstan's result against Denmark. At the start of the qualifier campaign, they were ranked the 5th worst national team in Europe. Yet, they fought till the end to potentially qualify for their first ever major international tournament. A shame that they lost to Czech Republic 3-0 on the final match day, but really an admirable effort prior to that. I will put them at B because expectations were little to none from the start. Montenegro, I think, deserves a C. They finished in 3rd place, 3 points behind Serbia, and all of their 3 losses in this campaign were only to the giants of this group, Hungary and Serbia. They did also play a few friendlies, getting demolished to Czech Republic 4-1, and also just barely beating Lebanon 3-2. Regardless, the Euro qualifiers was the main focus, and I think they deserve a C. Now for North Macedonia, they did not leave such a massive mark compared to the last World Cup qualifiers. Just 2 wins against Malta isn't great. but a draw to both Italy and England, with them obviously being underdogs in both of those fixtures, is still admirable. Sure, the other 2 times they faced those 2 countries, they conceded a lot more goals. And they also blew a 2-0 lead to Ukraine at one point. But there's no denying that this side did not leave others struggling at moments. They fell short at the end, sure, but I don't think it's worth putting them all the way at the bottom or even at D tier. They also won their schedule friendlies this year against Armenia and the Faroe Islands, so I'm going to put them at C. Moving on to Netherlands. They had a very bad start at the beginning of the year, losing to France 4-0, losing in both of their Nations League matches on their own home ground. It looked to be doubtful times for Koeman, but they picked themselves back up, getting 2nd place in their group. They couldn't beat France either time they faced them head-to-head, but they did defeat any other team they faced in this group. I would put them at A, but the Nations League, I think, definitely deserves a tier down. I think there was a lot more expectation from them, especially with them hosting the final stage of the tournament. They recovered well in the second half of the year. I'll definitely give them credit, but there's a lot more expectation from this side. To me, they were looking like one of the best national teams in 2022, but 2023, definitely not the most convincing at this current moment of time. Definitely can be prone to many other teams that are looking to be more even with them on paper, which is why I'm going to be putting them at B. Next up, Norway. Ultimately, this year was a failure for them. Their goal was to qualify for their first ever Euro tournament after 24 years. Holland has still not participated in a major international tournament. The expectations were high for many to finally do it this time around, and they fell short massively in their group. 6 points behind 2nd place Scotland. To be fair, we'll get into Scotland later, they were fantastic. But the first time they played one another, it was crazy how much Norway blew that opportunity. Straight after subbing off Holland, Scotland scored 2 late goals. Maybe some people saw it coming, as they already have a pretty bad track record, but just with the likes of Holland and Odegaard, many have higher expectations for this team. This was simply not a good year for them, so I'm putting them at D, which means I have to bring Georgia down as well. Sorry. Whoops, I almost missed Malta. That's an easy F. They only scored 2 goals, 8 for 8 losses, 20 goals conceded. Yeah, self-explanatory. Moving on to Northern Ireland. Definitely a disappointing national team in recent years. This time they finished with 3 wins and 7 losses in their group, only being able to beat San Marino twice and then Denmark on the final match day. But again, Denmark were not taking that match seriously. They did not play their strongest lineup. Look, along with San Marino, they were the only team that weren't necessarily competing for the top. They had the same exact record as Bosnia as well. I'm putting them at the bottom. Moving on to Poland, this was definitely a year to forget. They're lucky to be in a playoff spot. They finished their group at 3rd place. As we talked about earlier, Moldova were able to grab 4 points against them. Poland were expected to get 1st, 2nd place minimum in this group, and they desperately fell short. With the incredible quality this side has and their incredible track record to qualify for these tournaments, this is a massive, massive disappointment for the country. Their cycle with Santos very much did not end well. The national team looked very unmotivated and undetermined, but even under their new manager, they couldn't necessarily pick themselves back up all the way. They still have the playoffs to rely on. We'll see if they can pick themselves back up, but for now, it's not looking like the best times for Poland. I won't put them all the way at the bottom. I'll be putting them at D. Moving on to Portugal, one of the easiest teams to put all the way at the top. They are the only country to finish flawlessly in the Euro qualifiers. 10 for 10 wins. Yes, obviously their group was not the most difficult, but you cannot deny the incredible football they played. They had some massive wins, including getting their biggest ever win against Luxembourg 9-0, beating Bosnia 5-0 as well. They actually didn't concede a single goal to any of the teams in this group apart from Slovakia. Just 2 goals conceded in the entire campaign. They by far have the best record in Europe right now. So yeah, easy S. Moving on to Romania. Now, there's no denying how brilliant this country were this year. However, their position is debatable. It's between S or A for sure. They did finish their group undefeated, topping Switzerland as well. That's very impressive and was unexpected. However, the group they were placed in was by far the group of life. And out of all the teams that went undefeated in the Euro qualifier campaign, they did pick up the most draws to teams that maybe they should have been beating. But gotta keep in mind, they topped Switzerland by quite the point margin. Being able to defeat them is not an easy task. They were the only team to do it. Maybe I'm overrating Romania a little bit, but topping a group where Switzerland looked to be the clearest of favorites, I'm giving them an S. Sure, Switzerland were disappointing and we'll get into them later, but can't give Romania any discredit here. Moving on to Serbia. Yes, Serbia finally qualified for their first ever Euro tournament as an independent nation. Bravo. However, if they didn't do the job in this group, that would have been embarrassing. And although they pushed through, it wasn't the most convincing display. Many fans are still optimistic with the national team, especially with how they performed in the last World Cup. Still, a lot of defensive errors are present. They failed to beat Hungary both times they faced them, and also didn't pick up a single win against Bulgaria, the side that finished last place in this group. The only times they got wins were against Montenegro and Lithuania. With the incredible side Serbia possess, they have to be better than that. Definitely job done for sure, but I think they deserve to be with the rest of the teams at the B tier. Now taking a look at Spain. They had that slip to Scotland at the beginning, but other than that, they have been bossing out this year. Topping the Euro qualifier group at the end, winning the Nations League as well. That Nations League definitely gives them a bit of a boost. They also had some incredible scorelines going their way. Sure, they slipped to Scotland at the beginning, but I'm going to be giving them an S. Next up, Slovakia. An incredible campaign from these guys, only falling short to Portugal, and like I said, they're the only team in this group to be able to score against Portugal. These guys had a massive bounce back after their dreadful Nations League campaign. Maybe you could argue with S since it's a bit unfortunate they had to face Portugal, but I think an A is good enough. Slovenia as well, I think, deserve to be an A. This is their first time in a long time qualifying for the Euros, and they had some massive performances, only failing to beat Denmark and losing once to Finland. They were incredible, and this is a very solid generation that's coming up. And I even noticed at the beginning that even though this was a somewhat doable group, a lot of people were still doubting this team from qualifying for the Euros. Did the job at the end fantastically well. I'm giving them an A. Sweden had a year to forget though. They finished third place in their group, which I predicted, but I didn't think the point gap would be this massive. 9 points away from second place Austria. Like I mentioned, they did beat Azerbaijan 5-0, but also got embarrassed by them 3-0 the second time they faced. Their only 3 wins were against the underdogs in this group. With the amount of quality this side possesses, it's definitely an embarrassment. As although they missed the last World Cup, they still participated in a lot of recent tournaments. I'm putting them at D. Now taking a look at Switzerland. Like I said, they disappointed in a group that they 100% should have bossed. Still though, they qualified at the end, but they really had some disappointing results. It started off strong for them, but they really started to slip. They ended up grabbing more draws than wins. What's interesting actually is that if you take away their wins against Andorra, their last victory was all the way back in March, as they just drew way too many matches and lost on the final day to Romania. Just one loss though, they qualified at the end. I'll put them at B. Whoa, I almost forgot about San Marino. San Marino, yes, they finished last in their group, which everyone expected. However, towards the end of this campaign, they had some very close fights. In fact, they scored in their last 3 matches. This is the worst national team in the world according to the FIFA rankings, by the way. And they nearly pulled off a result against Denmark. Say what you want, they still have yet to get their first competitive win. But that stat alone definitely makes me think should not be all the way at the bottom. Still not grabbing a win, of course, but the expectations for this team are just at the all-time lowest of low. I'm giving them a D. Now for Turkey, they topped their group. Very nicely done. Just one loss to Croatia the first time they faced them, but they bounced back the second time around. A few draws I thought that they should have potentially won, but this side is showing some promise. They did better than Croatia at the end, which is why I'm going to put them 1 ranking above Croatia at the A tier. Oh yeah, they also were one of the teams to beat Germany this year. Moving on to Russia. Yes, they are banned from UEFA. However, they still have been playing friendlies. This year in particular, they went completely undefeated. Some interesting draws like to Qatar, Kenya, and Iran, but they also defeated Cuba 8-0. I don't know what to say. I mean, I'll be honest, I didn't watch these matches. I really don't know how they actually performed. Feels weird to put them at S though, despite them going undefeated. I don't know. I'll be nice to Russia and throw them at A. Ukraine, on the other hand, I already mentioned their situation when I was talking about Italy. They just missed out on qualifying for Euro 2024, sharing points with Italy. It was a very unfortunate way to get knocked out. And they put off some tremendous fights throughout, getting a draw to both Italy and Ukraine. I feel bad for them. They looked like one of the best teams to not qualify at the end. They saw the playoffs though. I will put them at B. Now for Scotland. This side had one of the best starts to the Euro qualifiers, which basically solidified their chances to qualify for the tournament, defeating Cyprus, Spain, Norway, Georgia. It was an incredible year and they held on to that top spot for some time. However, towards the end, yes, they had some injuries, but they lost the groove. Their last win was in match day 5 of 10 against Cyprus. After that, a loss to England in a friendly. Spain got their revenge. They lost to France 4-1, and then failed to beat both Georgia and Norway. Incredible start though, and Scotland have a lot to look forward to. McTominay was so clutch in this qualifier campaign. If they kept the momentum throughout the entire time, I would definitely put them at S, but the second half of the year was definitely not as convincing. I'm throwing them at A. Moving on to Wales, yes, they got the best out of Croatia, but after being in a very solid position to automatically qualify for Euro 2024, they blew it, drawing to both Turkey and Armenia. Not much expectation was there for this side, of course, as, I mean, their best player, Bale, was gone, but still, despite some of their solid efforts, they failed at the end, and the fact that they blew their incredible position makes me think they shouldn't be ranked any higher than a C. And finally, Kosovo. I hyped the site up a lot. Many people disagree with me, and they were right too. They finished at 5th place with, to be fair, quite a lot of draws, but only 2 wins. They drew to Switzerland both times they faced them, but couldn't beat Belarus either time. Despite this side being very overlooked, they actually have a lot of solid players, so I was expecting a lot more. But I'll give them some leeway for making this group exciting. I'm putting them at D. But there you have it, guys. That is my complete ranking for all the European national teams for the year of 2023. Of course, this is just my opinion. Let me know what you would change in the comments below. Thank you all for making it to the end. Please hit that like button if you haven't already, and subscribe if you're new. Lots of Euro 2024 content to come. And of course, we have the other international tournaments coming up very soon as well. AFCON and AFC Asian Cup will definitely be exciting. I'll see you all very, very soon. Take care. La con noche.